We will start the webinar. Well, my name is Daniel Makel. I'm leading the Center of Excellence in Regulatory Science and Innovation with a focus on digital CMC. And I will briefly kick off now the webinar before I then introduce Professor Paul Chapman, who will primarily lead us through the webinar today. So the Digital CMC CERSI was started about bit more than 12 months ago, is sponsored and supported by the MHRA, and we are primarily focusing on digital CMC, so chemistry, manufacturing, and controls area. We bring together regulators, industry, academia, and also professional bodies into a safe space where we have debates and discussions and generate also examples and a framework to support the acceleration of the use of digital technologies in CMC and in regulatory environments. So we particularly focus on establishing a framework that enhances the confidence in digital tools across all the different stakeholders, develop a range of different enablers that support that in terms of training, case studies, and also this virtual assistant VERA that we will hear more about today. So it's my great pleasure to introduce now Professor Paul Chapman, who is Director of Emerging Technologies at the Glasgow School of Art. We have been working with Paul for several years now, especially around in the space of XR, so extended reality technologies that includes virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. But now we also engaged with him around this virtual assistant, and that really builds obviously on his expertise. Paul was head of the School of Simulation and Visualization at GSA, director of Hull Immersive Visualization Center, and headed the Simulation and Visualization Research Group in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Hull. He holds a BSc and MSc and PhD degrees in computer science, and he's a chartered engineer and chartered IT professional, fellow of British Computer Society, and was an inaugural member of the Royal Society of Edinburgh's Young Academy. And with that, I would like to hand over to Paul now.
Yeah, so my name is Paul Chapman. Just mentioned my background really is in computer science. So I'm not a chemist or a pharmacist. All that material just goes over my head. But I have got a good understanding of computer science and technology. As Daniel said, we've been working together with CMAC for several years now, primarily sort of working in virtual reality and just XR really, but more recently in the field of artificial intelligence. And it's really interesting when you start to couple all these different technologies together. So we'll start off with just a brief sort of problem statement, and then we'll have an introduction to RAG, because I'm aware that not everybody will be aware of how sort of RAG systems work, which is the main sort of underlying architecture of VERA. We'll look at the corpus and curation, and my colleague Rocaria will talk a little bit about that. And we'll talk about the VERA architecture, and then we'll do some demo prompt engineering. Okay, so if you work in digital CMC, you'll know that the regulatory sort of guidance landscape is vast. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of documents from FDA, EMA, MHRA, ICH, ISO, WHO, and more. And these documents aren't static. They're constantly evolving with draft, discussion, and published versions all in circulation simultaneously. And the problem is that manually searching through all of these is time consuming. Regulatory intelligence gathering, finding the right guidance from the right body for your specific question can take hours. And that slows everybody down, whether you're working in industry, academia, or for a regulatory agency. So why can't we just use ChatGPT, but existing AI tools for that? The issue is that this is highly specialized literature. It's niche and it's rapidly evolving. Much of it simply isn't in the training data of general purpose AI tools. So that's the gap that VERA is designed to fill. So a brief introduction to RAG. RAG is Retrieval-Augmented Generation. And I'll just explain what that means before we get into the architecture. At its core, RAG connects a large language model to a curated document database at query time. So rather than relying on what the model was trained on, it goes and fetches relevant content in that moment. And crucially, unlike sort of general web search, you get to define exactly what the LLM draws from. You control the knowledge source entirely, which in a regulatory context is essential. So when you ask a question, the system first retrieves the most relevant passages from that document database and then passes them to the LLM to generate a grounded answer. So the response isn't coming from the model's general training knowledge, it's anchored in the specific documents that you have curated. So first we have retrieval with RAG. So when you ask a question, the system searches the document database and pulls back the most relevant passages. It's finding the right content from the right sources. And those retrieved passages are then used to augment the query. They're added as context alongside your original question, giving the model something concrete to work from. And then finally, generation. So the LLM will take your question and that retrieved context and generate a direct, coherent answer. So it's not the model guessing from memory, it's the model reasoning over real source material that has been retrieved specifically for your question. We could use a fine tuning as an alternative, retraining the model on our documents, but RAG was the clear choice for a regulatory context because fine tuning is computationally expensive, and every time new guidance is published, you need to retrain. And with RAG, the knowledge base is simply updated. And critically, every answer is traceable back to a specific document and page, which is a lot more challenging if you're using fine tuning. So here, in a little bit more detail, we start with our raw data sources. You can see my mouse over here. Because LLMs can only process a limited amount of text at once, we break those documents into smaller chunks. And then from chunking to embedding, each chunk is then converted into an embedding, which is a numerical vector that represents the meaning of that text. And this is what enables us to do semantic search rather than simple keyword matching. Then we have embedding into the vector database, so those vectors are stored in a vector database alongside the original text. And this becomes searchable knowledge base. So then when the user makes a query, we do embedding on the query, and that gets converted into a point in the same multidimensional space as all the document chunks. And then we can do a nearest neighbor to find chunks whose meaning is closest to the question, and we can retrieve those. And we've got vector base into retrieved documents into the LLM. So the most semantically relevant passages are retrieved, and alongside the original query here is passed to the LLM. So we get the relevant documents, the relevant content, plus the original query, and then that's passed to the LLM, which generates a grounded response, which comes back to our end user based on the curated documents, not based on the general training knowledge. So clearly this raw data source and the accumulation and gathering and monitoring of this raw data source is very important. So I'm going to hand over to Valkyria just to talk a little bit more about how those data sources were collected.
Thank you, Paul. Part of this work was done, this entirely compilation of the data was done by Matteo, so I have to thank him for that. We compiled and curated data set of 314 documents at the moment, and this is growing, documents relevant to digital CMC regulation. For each document key metadata were extracted, including title, organization, document types, and etc. So the documents were selected, obviously based on regulatory relevance, and this includes international standards, organizations such as ICH, ISOs, and as well as regulatory authorities, including FDA, EMA, and the MHRA. So we also included EU legislation, peer-reviewed scientific journals, and documents produced within the CMAC Digital CERSI project. Obviously, there are 2 documents that we haven't published yet and haven't finalized yet, but they will be very important. The white paper and the case study paper will be part of the data set. So this is to ensure that the data set reflects both regulatory guidance and supporting scientific context. So it's important as well that peer-reviewed literature is included. And this is just to, is a pretty picture. Thanks, Daniel, that compiled this for us. It's just to give a illustration of how the documents are splitted. So the data that we have is showing here that the guidelines are the predominant document types in the regulatory landscape, mainly issued by the major regulatory authorities and international organizations. So at the same time, the landscape is rapidly evolving, with several draft documents emerging to address AI and machine learning. One example is the ICH M15 that was just published, the final version now in January. And finally, scientific literature complements regulatory guidance, as I said before, so helping to interpret and contextualize these frameworks for practical implementations. So that is what we have at the moment, and as I said, this is rapidly evolving, and more papers will be added for this phase of the project, and this will hopefully will mature and will enhance as we move on within the CERSI. I'll pass over back to Paul that will describe the architecture of VERA.
Thanks, Victoria. That's great. Okay, so let's just, this is still RAG, but it's a little bit more in detail, and it also goes beyond sort of the basics of RAG, slight variation. So you still got you've got your 2 inputs, you've got your raw data sources, but then we've now also got this raw metadata, which is really important for us if we want to do sort of cross-referencing and understand where the documents have come from and their different categories, etc. So we've got the raw documents themselves and the metadata that Victoria has just described. For example, title, issuing organization, document type, region, year, all carefully curated. The text path here, which is very similar to what you saw in the previous architecture diagram, it looks familiar from the one I showed earlier. So in essence, we have text extracted, chunked, and embedded into the vector database. But VERA also handles images. So this is the top line here. So diagrams, decision trees, regulatory flowcharts. So all the publications, we extract all the figures from those reports, of which there's hundreds and hundreds of these figures and images. We'll filter those. So for example, anything that's below a certain dimension, we can just throw away. We can use an AI to determine if an image is just for sort of display purposes and there's no actual real content there. And then when we've got that subset, we've got rid of all the illustrative figures, for example. We can then take that subset of images and send that to another AI, for example, GPT-4 Vision, and we can get a context to describe that figure. The other thing we do is we also send text that's around the figure. So typically a figure by itself, you can understand that, but if you have the surrounding text above and below it, that often contains important information about that figure. So all of that information will then also be embedded and stored within the database. So metadata is extracted. So then the raw metadata is at the top here. We need to extract that data and normalize all that. So for example, some documents might be referred to as being from the United States. Some documents might say they're from the US or from the USA. So all that information needs to be normalized. And finally, everything will land in this vector database here. And we're using a Redis database, which has been chosen for its speed, because Redis is an in-memory database. So the entire index is held in RAM, which is why the search times are so fast. They're sort of sub 30 milliseconds for around 35,000 index chunks. So it's very, very quick. You've still got delays because you've got to go through the LLM, etc., but the actual access to the database is extremely quick. At query time, the VERA web service will orchestrate everything. So it will take the user's question, searches the database, and assembles the context for the LLM. Crucially, VERA has behavior guidelines, and these will constrain what the LLM can and can't do. So it's been instructed to stay within the corpus of the raw data. It does occasionally branch out, but if you ask it questions that aren't relevant, it shouldn't answer them. Ironically, it does know the answer to them, it does know the answer to your questions, but it tries to sort of stay focused on the raw data itself. So if you ask a question which is outside the scope of the corpus, then it shouldn't answer. The large language model itself is modular, so it's currently using OpenAI, but the architecture supports alternatives like Llama or Hugging Face, which give flexibility as the landscape evolves. And the response goes back to the user with citations, so every answer can be traced back to a specific document and page. Because we've got the normalized metadata here, we can store elements of that within the vector database. Then we can do a form of filtration when we're actually gathering information back. Okay, so here we have the web page. Important things to note is that we're only at version 0.7, so this is very much a prototype. This is being, it's currently evolving, but it's still very much a prototype and at the early stages of development, and we're aware of. But as a first stab, I think it's looking pretty promising. So you have to you log in. There's just a few descriptions here about the site and some of the stuff that Daniel was talking about at the beginning. You log in, and if you go to metadata, then here you can see all of the data that Bakary was talking about. So it's currently, I think, 314 documents, and for each document it's been categorized. So we've got source organization, the document type, publication, etc. And for any of these, I can click on details, and it should bring up more information on that publication. So this is how we've fed the AI. You can also filter. So for example, if I wanted to say, okay, what are the FDA documents that we've put into this system, then I can just click on that to unselect them, and then click on FDA. And as you can see, it's showing all the FDA documents that we've used in VERA. And again, I've got year, and I can toggle and move these around and see the updates in real time. So that just enables you, just for transparency, so you can see the documents that we've fed into the system. So if I click on chat here, it should boot up. There, we should get, fingers crossed, in Blue Peter fashion. Sometimes these things don't work, but Seems to be booting now. So here in the main window, you've got information that comes back from VERA. And you can see that I was a child of the 70s and the 80s with the retro display there. With some sample questions here, and we've got the question tab here, so I can put my question in here. And let me just bring up. So if I'll just cut and paste, for example, question here. I'll just put that into there. Press enter. It will have a think, and then it will do everything that I've just described in the architectural diagrams, and it will come back. And at the moment, it will be searching through all of those different documents. I have the ability to ask for different levels of detail. So if I say I want a concise response, I just need to click on concise, or I could click on detailed. If I click on detailed and then ask the same question, it should give me a much more detailed response. But equally, I can actually put, with a bit of sort of prompt engineering, I can also request how it responds within the actual prompt itself. So that's a very, detailed response there. But I could equally, it won't let me put a message in until it's finished talking. If it's talking and it's the wrong thing, there's a stop button here. But I could equally say, even if I keep this on detail, I could say what the requirement for GMP and manufacturing. I could say respond in 30 words, which would be interesting. Okay, so you can see how it responds. I've got the ability to do more advanced RAG settings here. Let me just see if I've got. If I click on advanced RAG settings here, it just opens up a few more options. So we've got the results count K25. So this controls how many document chunks are retrieved from the vector database before being sent to the LLM. And the results are ranked by a similarity score. So a higher K means you're including progressively less relevant chunks. More results mean broader context, but potentially more noise. And fewer results mean more focused, but might miss relevant information. So I think 25 is a sweet spot for most queries. We've also got this similarity threshold here. And this is it controls how closely results must semantically match your question's meaning. So it's not the exact words, but the system converts your question into a 384-dimensional semantic vector. And then it finds chunks with similar meanings by measuring the angle between vectors in semantic space. So a score of 1 means identical semantic meaning, not necessarily identical text. So GMP validation and good manufacturing practice qualification could score very high similarity, even though they're with different words. Low thresholds will accept loose semantic connections, and high thresholds will demand precise semantic alignment. And a default of 0.3, I think, ensures that we capture relevant content even when regulatory documents use varying terminology. We've also got the ability to filter in the same way that I was showing filtration in the metadata window. So, for example, if I said, I don't know, if I just said, tell me about risk. And then if I go to organization and I just turn them all off, but I leave on, for example, I don't know, ISO, then it will only use ISO documents in order to answer that question about risk. Equally, I could change the year parameters, and you can have multiple flags within the filter. Equally, within the filters, I could specify a region. I can turn these on or off, or I could do year. So, for example, if I push that and then do risk, then it's unlikely that it's going to find anything. It might do. Let's have a look. No, it doesn't have, because my search criteria is too tight now. But I could also I can reset it, or you can open it and you can just play with those parameters and change it. I could say, for example, I'll show you some of the imaging work. I could say, show me a diagram related to AI, or depicting a diagram about depicting the fields of AI. I don't know if that's going to work. It's describing it. It's not showing me a diagram. Let's reset these to defaults. Let's try. I can stop it with this button here. If you press that one, let's do show me diagrams related to risk. Okay, I'm not sure why it's doing that. It's the blue peak. So yeah, no, so it should fire up some diagrams. I might just clear the chat. Oh no, there we are. Yeah, it is doing it. Yeah, brilliant. So it's actually got quite a bit. Oh, it's because I'm on detailed here, you see. So it's given me a lot of information plus the actual diagrams, and it's got the references here. So this is telling you what the document is and what page number it's from. So that's because I had details still flagged. If I put that onto concise and then I said, show me diagrams related to AI or to risk, then it'll probably just show me the diagrams without the actual context around them. Yeah, so it's a bit more concise. If I go off piste and say there's the gnome made of cheese, I generally don't know what it's going to say to that. I'm hoping it's going to say that that's outside the remit of VERA, but it may attempt. You never know with AI. Oh no, it does. It does answer it. Okay, so typically what it will do is, there's a possibility that because cheese has got some sort of material element, it might get one little hit back from the database. If I say, let's have a look and see what other questions. Yeah, generally if it can't get any RAG documents back from the corpus, it will typically say that it doesn't know the answer to that question. Okay, so those are the main sort of filtration things that we can do. I've explained this here, and updates, that's just for some of the admin staff, just to see various versions. I'll just jump back to the presentation. This just shows some of the data that's been gathered from a number of users. This was probably collected a few months ago, but it shows the most distinctive terms from, I think it was over about 130 questions or so, and essentially highlights words that are both frequent and distinctive, while suppressing generic terms that appear everywhere, like the and, etc. So the standout terms here are data, digital tool, model, risk, regulatory. It tells us that users are engaging with exactly the kinds of questions that VERA was designed for, specifically sort of regulatory frameworks, risk management, and data-driven approaches to digital manufacturing. But keyword frequency only tells us so much. It shows us the words that people are using, but not necessarily what they're actually trying to understand. And for that, we need some form of sort of semantic classification. So this visualization shows the concepts that they were actually asking about. So the underlying domain areas that their questions belong to, and each question was classified by AI into predefined pharmaceutical domain areas, and then the size of each term reflects the frequency questions fell into that category. So this confirms that the focus of user interactions at that point in time is what we expect, which is specifically regulatory compliance, with strong secondary interests in AI and machine learning tools, digital health, and documentation. So just moving on to the final slide, I think the idea really is to continuously expand and update the corpus as new guidance is published. We need to have a system where we've got some sort of life cycle management of documents, because I understand that you have documents in various levels of the life cycle, in draft versions and then release versions, and then different versions come out. So we need proper version handling for the RAG system there. I think we need improved filtering, multimodal capabilities based on feedback from yourselves. We need to get some sort of formal evaluation framework together for VERA. Although, as I said, it is only version 0.7 or whatever it is at the moment, but we are, constantly trying to improve it. And then widen access beyond the digital CMAC CERSI to industry, academic and regulatory stakeholders. There you go. I hope that's been of interest to everybody.
Thank you very much, Paul. That has been great to get a bit more details, and really good to see how that progressed over the last year. Has been brilliant to work with you, and I think I find it great where we got to actually thinking about it a year ago. And what we can now do with this. I think it also has been a great learning journey for us to build that together for the first time, to learn how we need to, what information do we need from documents, how can we query them, what is useful, where is it not useful, where is it struggling, where is it actually already really powerful. So I think that has been absolutely fantastic to learn about that and work with you. Some publishers like BCI are moving to protect their content using DRM, for example, by focusing users to download adopt digital editions instead of normal PDF reader. Did you face this problem when accessing the raw text from these publishers? If so, what did you do about it? Might be actually also for Valkyria and Matthias.
Yeah.
So I think at one point we did. 90% of the ones we could access, there were, and Matthias and Valkyria can come in if I got this wrong, but there's also publicly available content for the documents that are locked down. And what we're able to do is we kind of wrap the publicly available text into VERA. So we taught VERA what was publicly available and that was open, but we put in a reference to the documents that were locked down. So we were able to reference that, but we weren't using the actual lockdown document itself.
That's correct. Yeah. All the paid guidance, this is the approach we've done because of copyrights and all this. So yeah, that's what we've done so far.
A good feature that I think would be good to add, because we've still potentially got access to the original document. So it might be that, when you see a reference, you click on that and then that pulls up the reference. And I think, as CERSI colleagues get to use the software, it'd be great if, if they find bugs and things. I found one late last night, which I was desperately quickly coding away trying to fix it. But yeah, like feature lists as well. If there's a feature, then, you can suggest that, and then we can see if we can add those in. But I think having the ability to be able to, because the RAG is built with text chunks, and then what it's doing is it's then getting a reference from the metadata and bringing up the reference. But we've also got the original documents because we use that to train the RAG. So, we could theoretically then, you click on that and it pulls up the original document. But if you actually go to the the first screen I showed you, which had all the documents listed, a lot of them have got hyperlinks in them, so you can then click on that and go to the actual source of that document. So I think that's a feature we can pull into it, but you can certainly go to that list of documents, and a lot of them have got document link, and you click on that and it'll bring up the document.
How do we keep it up to date has been something that we have been discussing as well. So because I think the landscape is evolving, new papers are published, guidance is moved from a draft to final guidance perhaps as well, and so that needs to be managed. And I think that's certainly at the moment a manual process. I think some discussion with Paul as well, there is potential to monitor some websites and some online databases to automatically pull and pull information and trigger perhaps that we add more documents, or at least have a flag that we know that there's a new document available. So I think there's lots that can be done more. At the moment, it's a manual process that we collect new documents and then we would send it to Paul to do that update. Paul, perhaps if you want to just very briefly comment on how much work is that now? If you would have 10 new documents, is that a month's work of getting that into the database, or is it actually a pretty fast process now?
It's a fast process because the way it's been developed. So if you've got 10 new documents, you just feed it into the system, albeit at a command line interface level, but you give it the documents and it basically says, have I already got these documents in the database? If not, it basically strips all the text out, chunks it, embeds it, strips all the figures out, puts it through an AI, gets a description of those images, and then just uploads it into onto the database. And obviously the metadata needs to be updated as well. So the metadata needs to be aware of those documents. So it's a fairly streamlined process. I think the interesting thing is that since we started this project, there's new algorithms available for things like embedding, and because one of the biggest challenges is actually stripping information out of a PDF and stripping publication down to its core components, because like with tables, there's complexities with tables and figures, and a lot of figures have different layers the way they've been constructed, so that can be quite challenging. But there are better, for example, embedding algorithms now, or better chunking algorithms out there. And there's, at some point I'd like to redo the whole thing, but with the latest embedding and chunking algorithm. So to embed and to chunk that 314 documents is probably about 6 hours work. So it's not too bad. I've got a pretty good machine to do that. So it's probably about 6 hours of processing time. And it's currently using OpenAI. We did use a different AI. We used a Hugging Face dedicated server, but there's challenges with that, because although your responses will be much faster, the actual LLM is not as smart, but it's a lot faster because you've got a dedicated processor that's running it. But then you've got challenges because you don't want that processor running all the time, because people aren't using it all the time. So then you've got to shut it down, and then you've got to wake it up when people want to start using it. If you wake up a server, it's going to take 4 minutes to boot. So it's just trying to find the right balance with all these different variables. But I think at the moment it's pretty good. We're using OpenAI. The access to the Redis database is extremely fast. It's sort of sub 30 millisecond access, which means that the LLM is getting all the text that's relevant to your question in 30 milliseconds, which is phenomenal. But then it's taking a little bit more time, because then the LLM then needs to think about the relevant response back. But all these parameters, because the system's modular, all these parameters can be upgraded and changed and moved around. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Got another question there from Ahmad. How do you relate semantic knowledge? Are you using some open source ontologies?
Yes, it's using Hugging Face algorithms, and I think I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's some sort of sinusoidal angle checking or something like that. In essence, it's if a vector is in the same direction, then it is the same semantic content, and it's not using, yes, that's it, yeah, cosine similarity, I think it is. So it's just doing the angle. It's not doing the magnitude of the vector, but it's just using open source Hugging Face algorithms. So we're embedding with Hugging Face.
Thanks, Paul. How verification of query results has been done from Tabassum?
Yeah, we're still operating on those. I mean, what we have been doing is looking back at the documents to see what responses are coming. But yeah, I mean, it's still very much early days. And as I said in I think my penultimate slide, where was it? We want to do some more formal evaluation of the whole VERA system, and get something out with regards to that. But yeah, I mean, at the moment it's kind of like just checking the publications that we've given it. So you might look in one of the publications and try and find a question that's where you can see the answers and you can see the content and ask it and see what you're getting back. But we've been fairly happy with it. Ian, who's not here today, I know he's been using it quite a lot, and he's been very happy with the results. But I mean, there's always improvements that we can make, both from an efficiency perspective, trying to get responses back to the user as fast as possible. The filtration, I think, and the interface and the filters, I think, can be improved, and tweaking bits and pieces here and there. And then of course there's I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be how we manage the document lifecycle. And let's say a new version comes along, it's okay, so what we're doing, we're stripping the old one out of the database, so we're putting the new one in. And then I think another area that I'd like to look at, to get some time, is to be able to do more sort of compare and contrast questions. So like, how does this year's data relate to previous year's data? So start to do questions like that. Yeah.
We had some discussions in the past in terms of different versions of the pharmacopoeia. Could you highlight what are the key changes, for example, if you would have multiple different versions, so that you could specify which year, and could you contrast kind of what are the key differences between different versions? So I think there's potentially also really good use cases there to use it for that, to highlight changes in terms of guidance and documents.
One thing Ian mentioned is he said it's really useful just for highlighting him where to go. So he would be, because it gives you the references and the links, he then knows, right, I need to go and have a look at that document. So I think, with the work or project that he was working on, he was able to use VERA to get, ideas of which documents he needed to be searching and looking through. So it's powerful like that. I think a lot of that comes down to the context that you set the LLM at when it's running. So if you're very strict with it and you're saying, only respond if you've got, only respond if you're confident in your response, just simple things like that with the actual instructions to the AI can significantly improve that and move away from hallucinations. We certainly we did have some issues with that at the very beginning, but what we were able to do is to just narrow that down through a more specific and stricter rules and regulations for the AI. So that was in my architecture diagram. That was which slide was that? That was the behavior guidelines. So that's with the behavior guidelines, if you're very, very clear about what it can and can't do, then it should improve that.
I think from our perspective, from the outset, it was really important that we get references next to the text, so that we can always go back and check, because we did find some examples where the response was right, but it was a bit out of context. And if you then go back to the reference and you actually just read around it, then you see actually that we understood how it got there and took that text, but actually the broader context around that is important as well. So I think we certainly always, if it's a critical information, we would always go back to that reference as well, and access the original text to check.
One nice little feature we could add in the future is the ability to be able to weight documents differently depending on the query that you're asking. So if there's documents from a certain organization which are more relevant to the question that's being asked, then maybe the AI would weight those more heavily. But that's something we haven't got that in at the moment. It's all based on the weighting, based on the textual response or the text chunk for that. But that would be something nice to put in. But you can also manually do that by just filtering out ones that you don't want to. If you know that you're interested in who, ISO, ICH, then you can focus in on those through the filter. But it would be nice if we could automatically do that, which we could actually from using an AI to query the query. Yeah, that would be possible.
So if there are no more questions, then I just would like to thank Paul again for the great work and the collaboration over the last year, and I'm really looking forward to continuing that. And also would like to thank everyone else, Valkyria and everyone else who has been, Matthias, who have been involved in that project, in that particular part, to get it where we are. And thank you for attending today. So if you want to follow up on anything, please get in touch. I put in the email address for that. So please feel free to reach out to us. And thanks.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Daniel. Thanks, Daniel. And thanks for the invite to talk to you.
Thank you, Paul.
Cheers.